Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive in to this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, church? This is your host, Kyle Knight, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast, conversations that we love to have here to hopefully help you go deeper in your relationship with God. I'm in the podcast studio. Our missions minister, Karina Boss, is out again today, but we've got our lead pastor, Chris Martin, here. Hello, Chris.
Hello.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm good. Glad to be sitting here. Glad to be talking about things. All of the things.
Glad to be talking about all the things. And all the things today includes groups. We're going to be talking about groups here at Fathom, as we are really super close to starting fall kickoff stuff, to really getting into the swing of things here at Fathom Church. But also I know for you probably in your family life or your work life or whatever it is, school life, whatever it is, we're getting pretty close to ramping things up. And so we wanted to do an episode talking about the groups at Fathom Church, but really deeper than that, of really why that's important to be a part of that, the goods, the bads of that kind of stuff, but really belonging to a church and feeling that community in small groups. So Chris, why do you feel the need to talk about this right now? Not just that because groups are coming up.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously we're, in this little mini series talking about stuff that we're launching for the fall. And one of the things that we launch in the fall is groups. So we have discipleship groups, which are kind of our small groups, our primary small groups here at the church. D groups meet in homes during the week. They are primarily mixed age and stage. So it's men and women of all ages and stages, and kids come along for the ride as well. So we do that. And then we also have men's groups and women's groups. So those are a bit more specific and tailor-made, obviously, for the gender-specific groups. And then we also have a college group for our college students that is led by our very own Joel Cathy. So we have youth group. I mean, we got lots of groups stuff that's going on. But the reason why I feel kind of compelled to talk about this is, we are a small church. We are a small church, about 250 folks. But even in a small church like ours, it's still too big. It's still too big to know everybody. Really, like, you would have to work unbelievably hard to try and know everybody at this church. And you can't. You just can't. And so we need to be intentional about making this smaller. And the reason biblically is that there are commands all through the New Testament that we have kind of, lots of churches have called the one another's, where Jesus says to do things to one another, honor one another, serve one another, bear one another's burdens, love one another, outdo one another in honor. These sorts of things that are commands for us, not suggestions, but commands for us to do community life within the body of Christ. And if you look at those one another's, they're not specifically good for us to do in large corporate settings. They're much more applicable in smaller groups. So we've taken that and said, okay, we're going to do small groups. We're going to do these D groups. We're going to have these men's and women's groups. We're going to have our college group. We've got lots of different group expressions to try and take the 250 or whatever that are at Fathom and say, hey, what if we whittled that down to 12? What if we took that down to 10? What if we took that down to 16 or 14 or, whatever the number is, so that you can really know them and serve them and honor them and pray for them and encourage them and build them up and bear one another's burdens and share your burdens and all of these things. And so I think it's super important. I preached a number of weeks ago a sermon on divorce. And one of the things that I mentioned in the sermon was some statistics about, broad scope Christians, people who self-identify as Christians, that the divorce rate amongst Christians is 50%. It's about the same as kind of the national divorce rate amongst all adults. And then I also mentioned that there's a Barna study that kind of shrinks that number down from just anybody who would say they're a Christian to what he calls active or practicing Christians. And those were qualified by people who indicated that their faith was very important and had attended at least one worship service in the previous month. And that number then dropped to, I think it was like 37% or something, 27%. I can't remember exactly. But it was lower than the 50% from just professing Christians. And then I did my best to go through our church roster and determine who had been divorced in our church. And we found that it was right around 10% of our church adult population. And some were like, well, what about, does that include, we have a lot of singles at our church? Is that, so I pulled the singles out and it was still 14%. So all I'm saying is what has happened in a church like Fathom is that we have lowered the odds significantly. And here's my theory. I don't have evidence to back this, but here's my theory. Just calling yourself a Christian without any sort of real church involvement puts you in about the same scenario as other people in our world. I mean, essentially, the odds, and we're talking about divorce in that one case, but I think just across the board, you're just essentially worldly with a Jesus fish, bumper sticker. The next layer is people who go to church. They go to church. They said, "Hey, I go to church at least once a month." So they are there at least once a month, but that's their only real involvement. They're not deeply connected, and it does help your odds of being less, quote, worldly. Um, but most of our church is involved.
Mm.
Most of our church is known. Most of our church is at least in some way engaged in a deeper relationship with this church body than just showing up once a month. And I think this is a theory, okay? It's a theory, but I think it pays out in the statistics.
Mm.
So I'm not saying that the church is the silver bullet to some of the woes and ills that may plague us, but I certainly think it's meant to be a big piece in helping us with those one another's. Other Christians deeply knowing us in our lives and walking with us, encouraging, calling out, disciplining, all of those things.
Yeah, that's good, and that's good to hear those numbers, even from small sample size of our church and everything. But hey, Chris, what do you say to the people who and I know a lot of people who especially that Fathom is a smaller church, um, but who go to church regularly every single Sunday, um, and maybe they're serving somewhere too, but and they kind of say like that's enough, like that's enough for me to get my, I'm getting my community. I know most of the people. I know, I put no in quotes, like I know most of the people's names at church. But I go there regularly. I see people at church on a Sunday morning. I serve like on the kids team or something like that. And then I go home and I'll see you again next Sunday. What do you say to the people who maybe kind of feel like they don't need the small group feel because maybe they have a smaller church and they
Yeah.
feel like that's kind of my small group. I might go to all the prayer nights too or something like that, but they're missing that, and maybe they're for some reason not wanting to get plugged into a church. What would you say to those people?
Uh, yeah. So one, I think I commend you on coming and serving and kind of doing the once a week thing. But one of the predominant metaphors for the church in the New Testament is family. We sometimes will call this is my church family, right?
Mhm.
And so it's obviously not a one to one correlation, but take that metaphor for just a moment of the church as family. What if you only saw your family once a week? And I know that there are certain circumstances and certain cases where those realities might be true, um, but how do you think over the long haul your relationships with your family would be if all you said was I'm willing to put in an hour a week?
Mm.
Now, I'm hoping that everybody sees that as an extreme example, obviously. because we're not saying that you should spend as much time with your church family as you do with your biological family or the, family that you live with or know or whatever
Yeah,
that
you're
might
gonna
be, your
get some
kids.
bad emails. Some
Nah,
mean
it'll be
emails,
fine.
right?
It'll be fine. Those will go straight to junk. But
Yeah.
but I do think that the idea here is, um how can you really be involved at a
Mhm.
familial level with people if all you do is see them at a large group gathering? It'd be like Marcy and I, um if the only time I really connected with her is when we did a family birthday celebration with, 20 people.
Mhm.
And it's like, hey, I'll come to the big event and we'll be husband and wife there, but we're never going to do stuff as just our family, and we're never going to go out on a date.
Mhm.
And like, I mean, there's a certain level at which the public front is kind of an easier front to, and we all know stories of this where husband and wives show up at things, and we think, oh man, they're doing great because they can put on a show in public.
Mm.
But the closer you get to somebody in their regular, everyday, mundane life, the harder it is to hide those flaws.
Mm.
So here's an example. The people in my discipleship group, people who've walked with me, they know me better
Mm.
than the people who just come on Sundays. Now, my discipleship people come to Sundays as well. They hear the same stories I'm telling, they hear the same sermons, they see me in the hallway, they do that stuff. Okay? So they see me in that way. But they also then see me in my home. They see me with my wife, they see me with my daughter, and they get to see a different aspect of my life where it's harder for me to, maybe polish it up and put on a good show. And I think that's true for me as the pastor, but I think that's true for everyone. You can put on your Sunday best for an hour,
Yep.
for an hour and a half, for 2 hours. But when your kids are screaming at the top of their lungs and having a meltdown in your friend in your D group leader's
Mhm.
house, and you lose your cool, all of a sudden that is a window into your life,
Mhm.
that's a discipleship opportunity that's necessary.
Mhm.
So like, hear me, you just can't hide as much.
Mhm.
And the whole goal of this stuff is to get us from Genesis chapter 3, covering ourselves in
Mhm.
our nakedness. Now, again, none of this is marriage is a different level than the covenant you make with people in your church, but the principles apply here.
Mhm.
That our propensity now in our fallen world is to hide and to cover, and the closer that we can get into one another's lives, the better we're able to actually show who we are and find grace for those flaws, find a help for those issues, find encouragement when we feel down on ourselves. And so I would just say, hey, you're doing well by coming on Sundays. That's a big step. Um, but you can fake it for an hour or
Mhm.
two. And you could listen, you can fake it in your D group too. It just becomes increasingly more difficult in the smaller the group and the smaller and more intimate the setting to actually hide those things.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Okay, so maybe shift a little bit to and I think we might start talking a little bit more about D groups. So you mentioned a lot of the other groups going on. We've got Bible studies and everything like that too. What about the people who are in groups now, who might just be like, well, Chris, it's not all great. It's not all like my group's not as tight as yours. Like it's not as great as yours. Our group just doesn't seem to be doing really well. Like what are we there are a lot of highs about being in a D group and connecting like that family and we see a lot of that fruit when like I gosh everything that comes to my head is when when a whole D group shows up to watch one of their members get baptized on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
It's just amazing, like all those highs of praying for each other and being there through all their like real life struggle things. But what are some of the lows of D group? Like what if somebody's experiencing some of that and maybe that's a little bit of a turn off of like I don't really want to do this
Yep.
anymore.
Okay, so D groups is one word that is necessary when talking about a small group, men's group, women's group, mixed group, doesn't matter what it is. Uh, One word: chemistry.
Oh, I hated chemistry in
Yeah, I
school,
know,
by the
I
way.
know,
Just like yeah,
just it brings
not
up
that
brings up
it
flashbacks
really does.
and triggering periodic tables,
Different kind
etc.
of
Yeah,
chemistry, I
no,
guess.
no, no.
Sorry,
Well,
but
so,
it's still the
yeah,
same.
but chemistry,
Yeah.
chemistry is now here's the truth: you can't force
Mm.
chemistry. You just can't. So I've been in a lot of different small groups over my life following Jesus. Some of them, man, like day one, we just dive deep,
Mhm.
and gosh, it's like awesome. It's like we're best friends from the first moment.
Mhm.
And when that happens, man, it is just so good. Like you don't want like you set your time. It's like, oh, we're gonna be here from 6 to 8. And then all of a sudden it's like 10:30 at
Yeah.
night and you're still talking and you're still
Mhm.
laughing. And it's just
Mhm.
like, listen, when that thing happens, when that chemistry locks in like that, it is so good.
Mhm.
So good. Um, and I have found that to be a gross exception to the rule.
Mm.
Very, very few groups do I feel like just immediate
Right.
connection and collaboration and chemistry with.
Mm.
On the far end of that spectrum, on the other side, is there are some times where you walk into a group and you give it a shot, and man, it is just awful.
Mm.
Like it's awkward, that nobody's talking. One person is dominating all the
Mhm.
conversation. Nobody really can agree on things. You end up on rabbit trails.
Mhm.
It's just, it feels like it's painful. It's painful.
Mm.
I've been in groups like that. Hear me. I've led groups like
Mhm.
that. And 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 I think I'm a good leader. I mean, I'm a decent leader.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes chemistry just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Uh, I also think that is an exception to the rule. I think if there's a bell curve of my experience on groups, the far end on one side is like, man, we are best friends from the moment we start, and then the far end of the other side with the small spectrum is this is the worst thing I've ever been to, and I wish I would. I always say going into a bad D group is like walking in on your brother making out with his girlfriend. It's just like, oh, I shouldn't be looking at this. I shouldn't see this. This is making me uncomfortable. That's how a bad
Uh,
D group feels,
yeah,
man. It's
that's pretty
just
bad.
really, really awkward. For most D groups, though, for most small groups,
Mhm.
it requires time. It requires vulnerability, requires patience, takes work. Some you'll connect with better than others, some you won't. But most of them, it's a discipline.
Mm.
And there is fruit, there is payoff, but it's normally requiring time and patience. Sometimes they just are bad and you just got to blow them up. Sometimes they're really, really good from get go. Most of the time, it requires work. Just like, hear me, relationships require work,
Mm.
right? Even a good marriage requires work. It's not just like gaga stage of dating for
Mhm.
your entire marriage. It takes time. It takes work. It takes ups and downs because you're going to sin against each other. You're going to get on each other's nerves. And hear me, the deeper you get into each other's lives, the more nitty gritty you see of each other's lives, the more you're going to be like, I can't believe that every single
Mm.
time that guy opens his mouth, he's talking about politics. If he talks about Fox News one more time, I'm going to lose my mind. And guess what? That guy needs to be loved
Mm. Right. Right.
like Christ loves the church, right? Like we need to love people like that. So
Mhm.
listen, I always tell people if a group isn't working and you've given it the old college try, and that means you've actually tried, not just I went once and I didn't like them. Okay, great. Go more than once. Okay. But if you've actually given it your all, you've shown up and you've been there and it's not working, hey, that's okay. Try
Mhm.
another one.
Mhm.
Try another. It's what we said last week about family devotions, right? Like if it stops working, try something
Yep.
else.
Yeah.
But I think to give up completely on them would be a very short-sighted
Mhm.
move.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, 'cause and I've been in plenty of groups in my adult life and led plenty of groups too. And yeah, so some groups totally connect and have that chemistry and some don't. And that's I would really encourage the people who if you're in a group, whether it's a D group or maybe you're in a Bible study here at Fathom once they start up and you're not really maybe none of your friends are in that group or something like that. You're not really connecting with that group or something like that. I really encourage you to not totally give up on that. Like
Yep.
we have a lot of D groups.
Yep.
We'll find a place for you, and we'll find hopefully a place that'll work with you and that you can have good chemistry with. But don't give up and say like, oh, that one group didn't work. I'm never gonna do groups again.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
In fact, the group that I was leading that was just so bad, I'll tell you the story. I mean, it was so bad. Like I thought to myself, what is wrong with these people? I don't know if I want them at my church. Like that's how like what is wrong? I mean, it was just so bad. Now, we did a year with them, and it was just like Marcy and I every single week it was like pulling teeth. It was painstaking. Okay. Uh, then we left to plant another group, and some group members in that current group took over, and the group like flourished. Like the moment that Marcy and I
So it
dropped
was
out
you
of that
guys.
group.
It was you guys.
Well, so that's the question is like, were we the problem? I thought they were all the problems, and maybe I was, but listen, it was just the wrong fit.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was the wrong fit.
Yeah.
Even the pastor can be the wrong fit for a
Right.
specific group. And that's okay. Hey, listen, I'm so like they flourished as a group and
Yeah.
they were awesome as a group. And I was like, okay, this is awesome. Like I'm so glad
Mhm.
that worked out. Because the point isn't for any one person to be like, oh yeah, I'm the one who made this group work. The
Mhm.
point is for the group to work. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think, you know, the main takeaway of this is get a part of a group. Like groups are so important.
well, it's so important, one, because it's good to get into the text together and talk about application from what we're studying, things like that. Two, it's good to have friends. Like it's just good to have people
Yeah.
who know what's happening. Like and mixed stage and stage is actually a really important piece
Mhm.
of this friendship because it's good to have friends that aren't just in your peer group.
Mhm.
So I think that's a huge thing. But then third, and this is maybe the most important. This is my favorite part about groups. Um, and there have been times in my life where the hard of life, the suffering, the struggle, the difficulties of life have felt nearly overwhelming. And I have distinct memories of small groups, of D groups, people laying hands on me and
Mhm.
praying for me, of people knowing, not the facade that I might put on in a casual
Yeah.
relationship, but the real nitty-gritty of what's going on in my life and in my heart,
Mhm.
and for them to know and to be a safe place to know,
Mhm.
and for them to be willing to lay a hand on me and pray for me. I mean, we have Marcy and I, we have been sustained by the prayers of small groups.
Mhm.
And so I mean, the win is relationship. The
Mhm.
win is church. Like that's what church is. It's not just coming and listening and singing and doing the thing. It's really being in
Mhm.
a body, being a part of the body. So man, if I can commend our church towards this as we are kicking off into the fall, all of our stuff online, signing
Mhm.
up for groups, getting connected in men's and women's groups, man, I would just commend it to you as a big next step for your faith journey. If you haven't been in a group for a while, maybe ever, it's time to
Mhm.
try it. We'll help you. Okay.
Yeah.
If you are in a group right now and it's just not been the right fit, talk to me and we'll
Mhm.
try and find a different group
Yeah.
for you. If you're in a group and you want to stay in that group, awesome. Stay in that group, right?
Mhm.
Like, but let's jump in together and trust that, man, this
Mhm.
is a part of God's good gift of his body to his
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah. And so as we close out here, just know that I mean you can sign up for any of these groups now.
Yeah, right now, man.
Fathomchurch.org/fall.
Fathomchurch.org/fall, actually. Fall is where
It's fall there.
all of our stuff is. You can also go to /groups and that'll show all of our groups.
Awesome.
But
Mhm.
listen, you can talk to us about
Yeah.
this too. Like again, we're small enough that you don't have to go through all the
Mhm.
channels. Send us a message at the church. We will get you plugged in.
Yeah, you could do that today or in just a little bit we have our fall kickoff on I think Sunday, August 27th.
Yep.
We will have all the signups. If you want to sign up for a group then go for it. Sign up for a Bible
Groups
study.
though, just here's the disclaimer, they're filling up
Yeah,
quickly. So
get on that.
they're starting to fill up. So yeah, sooner rather than later, friends, if you
Mhm.
want your pick of groups, because we're starting to see things fill up,
That's
which
right.
is great. It's great. We got some new groups starting. So it's exciting times. But yeah, sign up and
Yeah.
get connected.
Yeah, we're really excited about the fall. This is one I mean, this is one of the big things that I'm excited about is all these new groups starting up at the fall. So, hey, thank you Pastor Chris for talking about that and the importance of even a small church like Fathom being in a smaller community and a smaller group of people that are wanting to do the same thing as you, that are wanting to dive deeper in their relationship with God, but also dive deeper with each other. Yeah, that's really, really great. So thank you, Chris, for that. Thank you, church, for listening, and we'll see you next time.